Chapter 8. I was wearing some heavy leather clothes and sweating profusely as I hammered steel into shape, sprinkling it with dragonglass powder all the while. I was in the fort of Lord Glover and had been staying at Deepwood Motte for the last few weeks. It was a quiet castle, the fortress and the town around it nestled in the forests of the Wolfswood. We had come to Deepwood Motte not too long after leaving Torrens Square. Thankfully, the Tallhearts had not needed any help with bandits or sheriffs. As such, our stay there had been incredibly comfortable and peaceful, and had been a welcome respite from our many adventures on the road. Deepwood Motte had, like all northern castles, its wooden areas rebuilt with stone. Lord Glover, however, took particular attention that the motte and bailey looked exactly as the original when the work was done. It actually came out looking rather well, with oak lumber that was artificially aged covering everything, hiding the stone from sight. There were many letters at Deepwood Motte waiting for me, and it was good to hear from my family. My father was incredibly proud of all the aid I gave to the Ricewells and Dustons, and discreetly hinted in his letter that my efforts with the spy network were a masterstroke. The old wolf was incredibly happy with having accurate information about what was going on in the most important castles of the south. He also heavily suggested I put more thoughts into finding a wife. My mother, on the other hand, was slightly less happy. She berated me for over a page, calling me everything from foolishly reckless to recklessly foolish. She then spent the next 2 pages of the letter going into detail about what was apparently my growing drinking problem. "You say I have a drinking problem, woman, but I have no problems drinking at all." In the end, she said how proud she was that I was making strong alliances, implored me to eat and bathe regularly, and ordered me to keep Yogi next to me at all times from here on out. Apparently she trusted the bear's common sense more than my own. In her defense, that's totally fair. Both of my parents were also eagerly awaiting the birth of my next sibling. Ned had settled into the Vale without any problems, and had struck up his infamous friendship with Robert Baratheon like a house on fire. With Ned actually being better at combat than his original self, he apparently gave Robert a run for his money in the training yard, and the behemoth of a man loved every second of it. I made sure Ned was keeping up to date with both the North and my own adventures. Ned thought they were great, comparing them to something out of a bard's tale, but I was hoping he would take some deeper lessons to heart. Not all men are honorable, and honor isn't always worth the price. We definitely didn't deal with the sheriff or the master honorably, after all. Stannis' parents had already left for Essos, and I was honestly dreading when they returned. That was going to be another emotional meltdown from my dour little bro. I just hope he doesn't almost get us all killed to work it through this time. I was making myself a basic set of plate armor, as while my father already made sure I always had some from the Winterfell forges, I was the only one who could enchant it. I was experimenting a bit here, trying to see if I could draw out a bit more power from the runes. I didn't have anything to go off, and Howland had already told me everything he knew about enchanting, so I was kind of flying by the seat of my pants. I had distilled some water, getting the purest amount of the stuff I could get with the tools I had. I then collected a deal of my own blood, and even managed to convince Yogi to donate some as well. I hadn't talked to Howland about it, but he still came in one day and added his own blood to it also. I mixed the gory broth all up in a bucket, adding weirwood sap as I stirred. I was using the mixture to quench the steel as I forged the different pieces. I hadn't noticed any differences yet, though the steel seemed to be flowing into its shape almost as if it was following my thoughts. Once it was all in the right form, I pulled out my trusty dragonglass dagger, something I kept with me at all times, and got to carving the runes. I carved the runes for both hot and cold centered around the rune of comfort, as well as the ones of strength, defense, protection, resilience, and even flexibility. Didn't want to lose any range of motion, after all. I quenched the steel for the final time in the mixture, more steam rising than previously, and I could vaguely see wisps of a rainbow of colors swirling in the steam. I grabbed a clay jar of weirwood sap, and began layering it into the grooves the carving had left behind. Once finished, I picked it all up along with my dagger, and headed out of the forge. It was late in the night, well after midnight, and only the guards were awake. They stood in their posts, leaning against their spears, fighting to keep their eyes awake. They each jolted to attention as I walked by, bowing their heads. I kept telling them to stop, but the habit was too ingrained, and I didn't have the time to work it out. I entered the godswood, making my way to the heart tree. It had a solemn face, with little expression, and while I could feel a tingle of power coming from it, it wasn't as strong as the heart trees of Greywater or Winterfell. I placed the armor on the ground, kneeling before the tree. I gave a silent prayer to the old gods that they watch over me and my people. I may not have been super religious in my old life, but I had always believed in some god. Being literally reborn in a world of magic, with much of the magic based around the trees, it was kind of hard to deny the old gods existed in some sense. If they were willing to help me out, so much the better. I sliced my hand open, before clenching my fist in such a way as to actually pull the wound apart slightly. It hurt like a fucking bitch, but it was necessary. I held my hand over the different pieces, and the blood poured onto the steel, flowing over every millimeter of its surface without a single drop falling off. When it was fully covered, I pulled my hand back and threw a splash of whiskey on the cut, wrapping it up in a clean bandage. The leaves of the heart tree began to sway. A strong wind started to blow around me, kicking dirt and debris like a small tornado around where I knelt. The eyes of the tree glowed brightly, and I could hear the howl of a wolf in the distance blended with the roar of a bear. I looked at the armor, and a wide smile broke out on my face. Quickly snatching it up, I began strapping it all on, finding that it fit me as nicely as a well-tailored Italian suit in the modern world. I ran into the castle, going to my chambers, and pulled out a small mirror that was kept in the room. The armor was beautiful. It was a metallic black and the steel almost seemed to both glow, and suck in the light around it at the same time. I had only carved simple runes in key areas, but now they flowed over every surface in beautiful tribal patterns, standing out in a dark crimson color. Centered directly over my heart, in bright silver, was an intricately detailed depiction of what would now be my personal sigil. It was the greatsword Ice, with a direwolf and a bear sitting equally tall on either side of the blade, one howling and one roaring, left and right respectively. Hells yeah, we had set up camp off the road in a small meadow. We had set up camp just before sundown, and a full moon was high overhead. The camp was set up like a large circle, with a massive bonfire in the center. My companions and I had our tents in the closest ring to the fire, with all the guardsmen having their own large tents completely surrounding us. The road from Deepwood Motte to Last Hearth was a long one, and we had been traveling for close to a week. I was seated on one of the benches we had brought with, Stannis and Bernard sitting next to me. We were eating some freshly caught venison, which we had roasted over the fire in the center of camp. Stuffed with garlic, onions, and potatoes and basted in a generous serving of maple syrup to wash away the gamey taste, we were feasting like kings. I drained my cup, picking up a wineskin for a refill, and I held it out to Stannis to see if he wanted more. He held up his own cup, and I filled them both with the Crannog wine. We were sitting around the campfire, taking different turns telling stories or singing a song, having ourselves a grand old time. One man called out that I should take a turn, and all the men started heckling me to share a tale or a ditty. I quickly searched my mind for any good ones from the modern world that would be appropriate for the setting, before finally settling on an old Scottish folk song I edited for the North. I stood up, everyone going silent, before I started to sing. I wasn't a great singer, but this song wasn't about skill. A Northman in a kilt left the tavern one evening night fair, and once could tell by how he walked that he'd drunk more than his share. He stumbled round until he could no longer keep his feet, and he stumbled off into the grass to sleep beside the street. Well, about that time two young and lovely ladies passed him by, and one looked to the other with a twinkle in her eye. Do you see yon sleeping Northman so strong and handsome built? Well, I wonder if it's true what they don't wear beneath their kilt. They crept up to the sleepin' Northman quiet as could be, they lifted up his kilt about an inch so they could see. And there behold for them to view beneath the Northman's skirt, there was nothing more than the gods had graced him upon his birth. I sang out to great laughter. Well, they marveled for a moment, and one said, we must be gone. Let's leave a present for our friend before we move along. As a gift they left a blue silk ribbon tied up in a bow, about the bonny part the Northman's kilt had lift and shone. Well, the Northman woke up to nature's call and stumbled toward the trees. He lifted up his kilt and then he gawks at what he sees, in the voice of wonderment at what's before his eyes. Ack lad, I don't where you've been, but I see you've won first prize. I boomed out, the men guffawing all over the place, giving me a moment to grab a sip of my drink. Our Northman friend, still clad in kilt, continued down the street. He hadn't gone 10 yards or more, when a girl he chanced to meet. She said, "I've heard what's under there, please tell me if it's so." He said, "Why don't you reach right up, and give yourself a go?" She stuck her hand right up his kilt, and great was her surprise. She larked at the Northman, and he had a twinkle in his eyes. She cried, "Why sir, that's gruesome." And then she heard him roar. He said, "If you reach up once again, you'll find he grew some more." The Northman's hands were numb with drink, his head was spinning round. He couldn't get that ribbon off, so homeward he was bound. His wife, she caught a flash of blue, as he took off all his clothes. And it piqued her curiosity, as you might well suppose. Well, she asked that Northman where he'd been and what he'd done. He said there was a contest at the pub and that he'd won. She cried, "You did not show that thing in front of all those men." "I did not show it all, my love, but just enough to win." I cried out the last part, a beaming smile on my face. The men roared all over the place, yelling so loudly I was sure they could hear us back at Deepwood. I was rather lucky that the kilt was actually a traditional outfit in the Barrowlands, otherwise that song would have fallen flat. I ended up being forced to sing it many times over, until the men picked up all the words and belted it out in chorus. I laughed and sang along with them, dancing around the fire with Yogi deep into the night. The night was dying down, most of the men had gone to their beds. The night watchmen were keeping their posts vigilantly, and what few of us were still awake were sitting around the campfire. In the honored tradition of campfires everywhere, we were now telling ghost stories. Most of them were about different renditions of the long night, the terrible others come to take us again. These stories made me extremely uncomfortable, as I knew they were much more than just chilling tales. As if sensing my discomfort, Howland decided to give his own ghost story. There were 10 men once that had met together at an inn, and they had all been hired by the local lord to perform a service. The lord was a northern lord, strong and true, but he was dealing with more than bandits and outlaws. Men were disappearing from their homes, not a hair to be found of them, the rest of their families sleeping soundly around them and none noticing their passing. So the lord sent riders far and wide, searching each for a man of skill. There was Esser Bronson, a noble knight of the south, and Bjorn, the truest archer to be found in the northern lands. The man named Bjorn answered the call, a simple hunter of humble roots, and sensing an opportunity for riches, the sellsword bosun came along as well. There was even Baron and Byron, the twin sword terrors, 2 notorious bandits given an opportunity to earn forgiveness for their crimes. They met that night in the inn, eating and trading stories of what they heard. They questioned every man in the tavern, but no one knew anything they hadn't known before. Each day the group went searching in the woods, and each night they all would return. Yet every day, come morning, one of the group would have gone missing. The companions were nervous, all growing more scared, but they were men of much experience and didn't believe in magic tales. They named each missing man a craven, and refused to back down from the mission. Finally, only the hunter Bjorn was left to search the next day. He went searching in the woods, just as every day before, until he claimed to have found the beast they sought. He told the lord of the castle, leading a great number of men deep into the woods. He led the way upon his horse, showing the men to the cave he had found. He got ahead of the group, however, going around the bend alone, and by the time they came around themselves he was nowhere to be found. They searched the cave high and low, scoured every inch. While they found bits of blood and bone, there was no sign of the creature or the man. So the lord returned to his castle, swearing to ignore every rumor he heard. The years went by, and the disappearances stopped, but no sign of the men hired to hunt it were ever seen again. Howland finished, nursing his tankard and staring into the firelight. I felt a chill go down my spine and looked behind me to the edge of camp. I could have sworn I saw the shadows move. Facing back at Howland, I shook it off. It wasn't even that scary of a story, I thought. It only bothers me because I know magic is real, along with monsters. That's quite the tale there. Howland, it have a name? I asked him. "Aye, my lord," he said, smirking at me. "It's called the Legend of the Deepwood Snark." I woke up groggily, my brain pounding like a jackhammer in my skull. I was cold, and shivering, and my mouth tasted of copper. I smacked my lips, gently shaking my head to try and gather my wits, before cracking open my eyes. I was strung up in a cave, hanging by my hands which were bound together with what felt like vines. I was wearing nothing but my small clothes, and the tips of my toes were just barely touching the ground. I looked to my side, and almost pissed myself. It was standing right in front of me. The creature stood 9 feet tall, covered in mangy black feathers covered in gore and grime. It had a vaguely humanoid shape, with bird-like limbs. The face was oddly shaped, resembling something close to a wolf, but with a sharp curved beak. It had venomous red eyes and a long stream of saliva slowly dripping off the edge of its beak. My eyes flew open wide, adrenaline rushing through my system. I yanked at the vines binding my hands, and kicked my feet trying to find purchase, but there was none to be found. The panic kept mounting before the monster reached out its hand, long wicked claws tightly gripping my face. It turned my head to the side, forcing me to look at it, and I could have sworn that its beak curled into an evil smile. There was nothing for it. I had only one option, and it was now or never. I glared straight in its eyes, slamming my consciousness into its brain. I could hear it screaming distantly, but I paid no attention to it. The thing's mind was foul, and it was taking every last bit of my willpower to ensure to not let it corrupt me. I was catching glimpses of what was happening, from both the creature's and my own perspective, and I could tell that it was flailing around wildly. I felt its claws swipe down my back, ripping open the skin, but I ignored it. Marshalling my strength, I lashed out mentally, and managed to take enough control of the creature to swipe at the bonds holding my hands. Slamming clumsily into the ground, I wasted zero time in rushing out of the cave as fast as I could. I could hear the monster screeching behind me, still reeling from my mental blow. I took off into the woods, heedless of which direction I was going, thinking only about getting as much space between me and that monster as I could. I was dodging past trees, jumping over rocks, tripping and falling only to scramble back to my feet. I heard a screeching roar that echoed over the woods, and I knew the thing was hot on my trail. I could feel the panic surging through me, giving even more speed to frantic pace. Bursting out of the forest, I flailed my arms around wildly trying to stop myself fast. Only 6 feet from the tree line was a massive gorge, a fast-flowing river underneath it. There was nowhere left to run, so I did a panicked search of my surroundings. Seeing a large stick with a sharp point lying on the ground, I quickly picked it up. I turned to the forest hearing the sound of something crashing through the brush, and stabbed out with the stick as hard as I could right as a black blur barreled into me. Both of us went tumbling into the gorge. I turned over on my side, heaving my guts out. Water poured out of my mouth, and I kept hacking harshly as the choking liquid was expelled from my lungs. I was laying on a small beach right on the shore of a small pond. A large and lazy river flowed out from the pond, winding its way down the countryside, and it was fed by a large waterfall which I must have traveled over. I rolled back onto my back, just staring up at the sky. The sun had just started rising, and it was a beautiful morning. I snorted. Then I guffawed. Finally, it became a great heaving laughter that took me prisoner, and didn't let go until I was crying and couldn't breathe. I wiped my eyes, clearing them of the moisture that had gathered, before letting out a sigh and looking to the other side of the beach. The creature lay there on its stomach, 10 feet away from me, its head cocked to the side and the stick I had stabbed it with impaled through its chest. Its tongue was hanging out, its eyes wide open and vacant, and stank to high heaven. I jumped to my feet, startled, before I managed to calm my racing heart. It was obviously dead, a branch sticking clear through its ribcage, and I let out a shaky breath. I grinned evilly at the corpse, picked up a good-sized stone, and threw it right at the monster. Right when it hit, the body twitched, puking up a mess of water and blood. I screamed. Grabbing my chest and trying to calm down again, I gave the thing a heated glare, before looking around the woods. I could see a much larger beach on the other side of the small pond, and it looked like a good spot to camp out. It would keep me away from this thing's corpse at least. I needed to get warm, and fast, or my situation was going to go downhill faster than an avalanche down a mountainside. I waded quickly into the pond, walking out onto the other shore. I walked into the woods, looking for firewood and any food I could forage. I managed to get a fire going pretty quickly, the lessons my father gave me as a child having their time to shine. I had made a simple lean-to, covered in small branches tightly woven together. I layered large strips of bark into the branches, stacking them on top of each other like shingles, and padded the inside with a covering of moss I had washed in the river. I had found some different edible berries growing in the forest, although it wasn't enough to settle my growing hunger. I made a shallow water fish trap, putting some of the berries in it as bait. I then spent my time digging for crawfish, managing to catch a good couple dozen. I checked the trap, finding a couple of catfish that got caught inside. I scooped them out, spearing them both on a stick that I sat over the fire. I had kicked some coals out, separating them from the original flames, and had made a small second fireplace right next to it. That one I built up until the coals were nice and hot, before placing a flat stone in the middle of it, and letting the flames die down. I placed the crawfish on the stone, and sat back to wait. It took me the entire day from when I woke at sunup, half drowned, but I finally had food, shelter, and warmth. I'll take that as a win. The food was finally done cooking. The catfish was bland, slimy, and tasted of low tide. The crawfish were filled with sand, grit, and mud. It all tasted heavenly. I was mowing down on the first fish, happily munching away, and sitting in the dirt. I was enjoying my meal, doing my best to ignore the stinging coming from the wounds on my back, when I heard the sound of someone running through the brush. I quickly stood up, hoping I had finally found my rescue, before I saw what looked like a noble lady charging into my camp. She ran across the long stretch of beach, looking behind her the whole time, before she saw me and drew up short. I knew I looked like a wildling, with nothing but my raggedy small clothes forming a loincloth, and she looked at me with panicked eyes. She looked to be my own age, had long brown hair, and a very pretty face. She had a curvy but well-toned figure, full pouty lips, and dark blue eyes. She was standing less than 10 feet away from me, when I heard the sound of more people running. An actual group of wildlings burst out of the trees, and I made a snap decision. I grabbed both of my catfish in one hand, took the stunned girl's palm in the other, and ran. Like a bat out of hell. We had been running for a while now, slowly gaining distance from the wildlings. Sprinting down the river, I saw two different paths ahead, and chose the second one. I saw a large boulder just ahead, so we quickly hid behind it. We hunkered down, both of us trying to make ourselves as small as possible, as the wildlings ran past us continuing down the river. I closed my eyes, resting my head against the rock, and just took some time to breathe. The last couple of days had been an utter shit show, and I was so done. Waiting a few minutes to be sure all of the wildlings had passed, I peeked around the boulder to make sure the coast was clear. Seeing no one, I stood back up, before offering my hand to the girl. "So my lady, that was quite the merry chase. May I ask your name and what you are doing out here?" I asked, still holding my hand out. "You speak the common tongue?" she asked me, surprised. "I know I must look terrible, but I assure you, I am no wildling," I told her, giving her a gentle smile. "How did you know I am a lady?" she questioned, narrowing her eyes and looking at my hand suspiciously. "You are wearing a warm but very well-made cotton dress, quality black tights, new-looking boots, and those are some very nice furs on your shoulders. It isn't that hard to figure out, my lady," I said humorously. "Well, I suppose not then. My name is Ayla Umber, daughter of Lord Morse Umber," she said, taking my hand as I pulled her up. "Wait, Morse Umber's daughter was kidnapped by wildlings. Oh, well no shit. My name is Lord Brandon Stark, my lady, and it is an honor to meet you." I grinned, kissing the back of her hand. Ayla Umber laughed loud and brightly. It was a very pretty laugh. "How did you find yourself all the way out here, my lady?" I asked her. "My father, cousin, and I were traveling to Winterfell actually. My uncle, the old Lord Umber, passed away a few days ago from his old age. My cousin, the Lord John, was going to swear fealty to Lord Stark, as well as attend to some other business." She hedged, not wanting to go into more detail. I chuckled under my breath. The other business was probably them trying to arrange a betrothal with myself, if I had to take a guess. "We should probably continue this conversation as we walk. I don't want to be here if those wildlings decide to double back," I said, gesturing down the path, and walking beside her as she started moving. So how did you get separated from your father and cousin then? The wildlings attacked in the night, fast and hard. They rushed in, killed the night guards, grabbed what they could and immediately started running away. I had been in my tent and stepped out to see what the noise was. Some big brute of wildlings saw me step out, picked me up and threw me over his shoulder, without even slowing down. She complained. I had to keep myself from chuckling over the mental image. Apparently these wildlings were either smarter or crazier than others, as they didn't flee north. Instead they ran south and west, carrying me the whole while. They kept running through the entire night and a good portion of the morning. After they made camp, the man who grabbed me undid my bonds, and was most likely about to rape me. Unfortunately for him he was exhausted, so I kicked him in the cock and ran like a rabbit. She said, giving me a smirk. I didn't try to stop my laughter this time, and I barked out a loud guffaw. That is quite the tale, my lady, and I am looking forward to seeing the look on Morse's face when he hears it. If he's anything like his brother and nephew, his reaction will be most amusing. I mused, still chuckling. Oh, and you have met my uncle and nephew. You can't honestly expect me to believe that you of all people are actually Brandon Stark. What would Lord Brandon even be doing out here? She asked, lifting an eyebrow and giving me a heavily skeptical look. Hey, it's a very long story, and one I am not even sure I believe. All I can say is that it appears I was kidnapped out of my camp without any of my men seeing in the dead of night. I woke up in a cave in my small clothes where I was about to get eaten by a snark, warged it into letting me escape, before I killed it with a stick as it tackled me into the river. Then I woke up on the beach right next to the one you found me in. I told her simply. She didn't have anything to say to that, but I got to hear her laugh again. We eventually found a small cave in the woods to spend the night. It was shallow, ensuring that there were no large predators sleeping inside of it, and it was worked into the side of a hill with a tree growing over it. The roots of the tree framed the outside of the cave, and while it wouldn't be comfortable, at least we would be out of the elements. I was shivering badly, and it wasn't all from the cold. That snark had reeked of putrid flesh, and if my back wasn't infected I would eat my own toenails. We needed to find our way back to civilization, or be rescued, and soon, or I was going to be in a bad way. My fever was getting worse, I was sweating profusely and yet still felt ice cold. As my teeth started chattering, I felt something warm press into my side. Hey, you're going to be okay, I heard a soft voice say. I still don't believe you when you say you are Lord Brandon, but you probably saved my life. I doubt I would have thought to hide off the trail. Very true. I laughed weakly. Don't worry. Unless I go septic, I should have a few days to get help before it's too late. If I go septic, I'm dead either way. Septic? Ayla asked me. Shit. I say that out loud. Doesn't matter. Not really. I answered. Rest. Don't worry. When my father's men find us we will be fine. I'll even make sure he rewards you. Make you a sheriff or even a master or a Southron knight. How's that sound? She whispered, gently brushing my hair. I had opened my mouth to tell her that it would honestly be a huge step down, when a man burst into the cave. I've been looking for ya girl, he said in the old tongue. It wasn't one of the Umber men. Adrenaline can do a lot of crazy things to the body, including cutting through the fog of fever and infection. I quickly looked around for anything I could use as a weapon, and found nothing. Well, a real fighter is never unarmed anyways. Curling my knees discreetly so that my feet had good leverage, I pretended to be too sick to move, and watched as the wildling walked into the cave. He seemed to be doing the whole stereotypical villain thing where he savors the fear as he slowly walks forward. Should have read the evil overlord list, pal. Right as he got close, I rocked back on the ground, planting my palms in the dirt on either side of my head, and launched myself into his gut feet first. I lifted him off his feet, slamming him into the side of the cave, knocking the wind out of him and probably causing internal injuries. I landed on my back, ignoring the massive flare of pain that rocked through me, and rolled over to the side as the wildling landed where I had been. I quickly jumped on his back, grabbed the back of his head with one hand and his jaw with the other, and twisted. There was a loud crack, and it was over. I stood up and looked over at Ayla, who was staring at me with wide eyes. I shrugged, walking back over to her, before I dropped onto my hands and knees. She jumped up and grabbed me by the shoulders, helping me to lean against the side of the cave. "So?" Ayla asked, giggling. "I take it you learned that move from your master at arms." I just gave her an incredulous glare. She had even used air quotes. How dare she not believe me? We heard the sound of loud voices coming from outside the cave, but we couldn't make any of it out. I got back up on my feet, only to sway to the side. Ayla caught me before I could fall over, holding me up by the shoulder. Stumbling to the front of the cave, we peered around the edge to see who was out there. Damn it. Fucking wildlings again. I pulled my head back and looked at Ayla. I walked over to the dead wildling and grabbed his weapon. Calling it a spear would be a bit generous, as it was nothing more than just a straight sharpened stick, with a fire-hardened point. Still, it was better than nothing, and I took a deep, fortifying breath. I am going to go out there and fight them. When I do, I am going to make as much noise as possible, kill one or two, before trying to lead them off into the woods. Wait a moment or two after they have left, and run as fast as you can in the other direction. If you make it back to your father, tell my family I love them, and tell Ned not to feed Yogi so many eggs, he gets gas. I told her, gently pushing her to the back of the cave. Wait, she cried out, running forward. She threw her arms around my neck and planted one right on my lips. Well damn, first kiss in this body. I don't even know your name. Ayla told me breathlessly. Damn it, my name is Brandon Stark. I complained, stamping my foot. If you make it out of this, do me a favor, and kick Howland Reed in the fucking balls for me. If that story of his wasn't some premonition or some shit, I would eat my loincloth. Without waiting for her response, I charged out with my spear held forward. I took the first wildling by surprise, killing him with a stab in the back. The other men roared, about 10 of them in total. I pushed the man I killed off the spear, using the tip to deflect the lunge of one man before spinning the spear around and smashing him in the temple with the butt of the weapon. He dropped, skull shattered, and I dodged to the left to avoid another stab. I dodged it successfully, only to get slammed in the kidneys by another man holding a club, and take a punishing punch to the jaw. I was good, but way too outnumbered. The fever was slowing me down, and I had gotten surrounded before I could try and lead them off. 2 of the men were holding me up by the shoulders while another one in front of me grinned evilly. I didn't know where the rest of the wildlings were, but I supposed it didn't matter. The man pulled out a dagger, more a sharpened piece of stone, and reached out to slit my throat. A spear burst through his chest. Ayla Umber tried to pull the spear back out, the shaft stuck in the man's ribs, and failed. She stopped trying, and instead decked one of the men holding me with a right hook. His head snapped to the side, but that was about it. He looked at the girl with a dark look in his eyes, and grabbed her by the arm. I shook off the man still holding onto me, kneeing him in the balls. He dropped to the ground moaning, and I lunged for the man holding onto Ayla. I didn't make it. Another fist came out of nowhere, laying me out on the ground. I had to take a moment to try and figure out which way was up and which was down. It took me a moment to gather my wits, but when I did, I was surprised yet again. I really should stop being surprised right now. Bernard was handily massacring the remaining wildlings, moving like poetry in motion. I had never seen the man fight before, indeed, I can't even remember having heard him speak before. But damn, if it didn't feel good to see him right now. The Stormlander finished off the last wildling, shooting the corpse a look of complete disdain. He wiped off his blade on the rags of the dead man's clothes, before putting it in its sheath in one smooth motion. He looked at me and gave me a smile, before putting a horn to his lips and blowing into it, long and loud 3 separate times. It is good to see you, my Lord Stark. Bernard said in a rich baritone voice, and it was one of the best things I ever heard. Ayla looked at us absolutely gobsmacked, her mouth hanging wide open. Bernard, meet Lady Ayla Umber. Lady Ayla, meet the Stormlander Bernard. I said, pointing at each one unnecessarily, before shooting a grin at Ayla. Told you I was Brandon Stark. I pitched forward, everything going black. I woke up in a comfortable bed with nice cotton sheets. I was laying on my side, and I could feel bandages stuck to my back. My mouth was dry, my skin was clammy, and the light hurt my eyes. Blinking them open anyways, they started to adjust, before I could finally make out the form of Howland sleeping a chair, and Yogi curled up on the floor in the corner of the room. Howl. I croaked out, trying to speak louder but my voice not agreeing. It didn't matter any. Howland jerked in his chair, before focusing on me. He jumped up out of his seat, before immediately handing me a glass of water. How do you feel, my lord? He asked me. I feel better than I did from last I remember, that's for sure. I answered him, smiling sarcastically. Where am I? We are at Last Hearth, my lord. It was the closest castle to where we found you, and Lord Morse was incredibly happy to have his daughter returned him. All of the Umbers are quite eager to thank you, though I think I managed to convince them to let you rest for now. He told me, giving me a grin of his own. How did Bernard manage to find us? I asked. When you were first discovered missing, we scoured the forests in the area surrounding the camp. We eventually heard a loud noise in the distance, and so went in that direction to investigate. While we didn't see anything, I warged a passing fox and managed to get a whiff of your scent, the trail stopping at the gorge. From there we followed the trail downriver until we came to the small camp you made. Nice shelter, by the way. Using the fox's nose, we managed to get within about a mile of where you were found. We split up then, each going in a different direction and taking a horn to call for help. Yogi, Stannis, and myself arrived just after you passed out. Yogi has barely left your side since. Howland explained. How long was I out? I looked at him questioningly. About 4 days, my lord. The wounds on your back had gotten quite infected. The maester had scrubbed them clean with alcohol and rebandaged them every day. Howland answered. I nodded, before I remembered one little detail. Did you find the body of the Snark? I asked. Snark? What Snark, my lord? Those are tales to scare children. Perhaps you dreamed of one while you slept from the fever, my story from that night invading your sleep. Howland said, his eyebrows scrunching together. No, that was what kidnapped me out of the camp. Howland. A Snark. A real-life, living, breathing Snark. How the fuck else did you think it happened? It tackled me off that gorge as I stabbed it with a branch, and its body washed up on the beach with me. I didn't move it, so it should have been on the beach on the other side of the pond from my shelter, right where I left it. I huffed out weakly. While this conversation was rather important to me, I was still too exhausted to stay awake for much longer. We searched all around that pond, my lord. And while I know of the beach you are speaking of, we did not find any corpses upon it. He told me, refilling my cup of water from a jug on a nearby table. Now get some rest. You need it, and we can speak more of what happened later. That was some nightmare fuel. I wanted to protest. I really did, but my body wasn't having it. I took another long drink of water, before handing the cup back to Howland. I laid my head back against the pillows, and fell back asleep. See ya.